Welcome to Muted in Medicine, the podcast where we break the silence on the untold stories and pressing issues within the healthcare profession. Join us as we dive deep into topics that often linger in the shadows of medical corridors and are not discussed in conferences, meetings, social gatherings, and in the hallways. They are often hiding. From navigating errors and facing litigation to the often overlooked realm of mental health among healthcare professionals. Through candid conversations and storytelling, we aim to amplify the voices and shed light on challenges that resonate across the medical landscape. So grab your stethoscope and a cup of coffee and tune in as we uncover the layers of complexity in the world of healthcare that are so muted yet so profoundly impactful.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Muted in Medicine podcast. My name is Saba Fatima, and I'll be your host for this podcast. I'm a pediatrician with a passion for helping healthcare professionals facing secondary trauma at work in healthcare, which often they're unprepared to face, and spreading more awareness about it. And with this podcast, we hope to discuss some of the most silenced topics in medicine that are often not out in the open. Today, we're talking about a topic that is often one of the most heartbreaking topics for me in healthcare. Something that often lurks behind closed doors, not openly discussed, and is indeed extremely traumatizing for almost every healthcare professional who goes through it. I often see anonymous posts on several physician groups which state, "I was recently named in a lawsuit. I'm devastated. Am I going to lose my career? I don't know what to do. I feel so lost." We are indeed talking about litigation, a topic which brings undeserved shame to many healthcare professionals, is a contributor to anxiety, depression, loss of personal identity, and in studies has also been shown to be a risk factor for suicide. To discuss this with me today, I have no other than Dr. Gita Pensa, a physician who has helped so many healthcare professionals with this truly life-changing event. Dr. Gita Pensa is an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Brown University and is widely recognized as one of the nation's leading experts on malpractice litigation stress and physician litigation support. Her open access podcast curriculum, Doctors in Litigation, the L Word, is an introduction to the practical and psychological preparation necessary for malpractice litigation defendants and is now used as a teaching tool in medicine, law, and the malpractice insurance industry. She works as a consultant to medical malpractice insurance companies, hospital systems, and defense attorneys, and also as a well-being and performance coach for defendants in litigation. Dr. Pensa has received several accolades for her work, and she has been featured in forums such as Time Magazine, NPR, and the new PBS documentary, A World of Hurt: How Medical Malpractice Fails Everyone. Dr. Pensa, welcome to the show.
Hi, Saba. Thank you so much for having me.
We start our podcast by asking everyone a question and we keep it a surprise. So what brings you joy in medicine today?
I learned a few years ago to pay much more attention to the small moments in medicine. Perhaps later we'll talk about the time that I spent feeling pretty awful and low and burned out. And as an emergency physician, I was used to getting a little bit of sustenance now and again from some crazy resuscitation or a bloody intubation that I kind of pulled out of my pocket. And those were great moments. But it turns out that once the luster of those things wore off, the real joy was in very, very simple person-to-person interactions, just, taking care of a little kid with asthma, making them feel better, or holding an older patient's hand and really connecting with them. And that now is what I focus in much more on, are the really small moments that give us that that real human interaction that we were meant to have in medicine.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you'll be surprised, this answer has been sort of standard across all the people we've asked. They've talked about the connection. So I guess that's the most important thing in medicine right now.
I would think so. And once in a while, there's a candy drawer that's filled with candy at work.
Sure. Yeah.
When that thing is full, it's also a good day.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting into the topic, I guess starting off with, why do you think litigation is so common in healthcare in general? And has it changed over the past years? Has it grown? Has it become less? What do you think?
I think the numbers of physicians involved in lawsuits has a tendency to go up and down. And right now there is a lot of, agony and hand-wringing over numbers in certain states, depending on what the state laws are and how prone those communities have been to excessive verdicts and things like that. But, I think I would say over the last, 30, 40 years, we've seen this thing go up and down. But depending on your specialty, the majority of us can probably expect to be named at some point. If you are something like if you're a general surgeon or an OBGYN, it would be almost unheard of to make it through a whole 30 plus year career and not be sued. And so, whether or not the numbers of all of us going up or down is there, I think that most of us should anticipate that this is going to happen to us.
Yeah. Yet I feel like we don't prepare for it, maybe because we don't want it to happen. Yeah.
I think there are probably a lot of reasons that we don't prepare for it. We don't want it to happen. We don't seek out information because we have this magical thinking about it. Like it's an insurance policy. If I don't think about it, it won't appear.
Right.
And we're not taught about it because the teachers that we have had in medicine, they went through it, but they were taught to be so ashamed of it that you wouldn't ever have known that they were going through it. So they never modeled anything for us about what it's like to go through it, how to cope with it well, how to be resilient through it. We have no idea. We have no framework for understanding that. Yeah. And so just generation after generation after generation of doctors, we just don't address it.
Yeah. And that's true. I think we don't talk about it. And why do you think there's so much shame though? And is it, I think, also talking about when litigation happens, we do as providers feel a lot of shame too, that why is it happening? So piggybacking onto that, is it always a medical error? Is it always that we've done something wrong that we're being sued or not?
No. And when you look at the numbers, over half of initiated lawsuits wind up as complete no pay cases, meaning that they realize, oh, this case isn't going to go anywhere. There's no fault on the part of the physician. There are still plenty more that keep going where there's still no fault on the part of the physician or the clinician. But the optics are such that maybe a jury could be convinced that that's the case.
Right.
Because, of course, the jury doesn't understand medicine. Or, when we're thinking about settlements and things like that, we're still thinking about what would these, hypothetical 6 to 12 people from the community think about the optics of this case.
Right.
So, but, more often than not, there isn't entire fault on the part of the physician. And sometimes it's because of, let's not put too fine a point on it. Sometimes people make mistakes. You have a bad day, you do something wrong, you miss something, it doesn't go the way you intended. That does happen. And we have to have frank and open discussions about that too, because that happens in every single career. There's not a person that goes through a life in medicine and doesn't make multiple mistakes and at least one really big one. Yeah. That's gonna happen. We don't talk about that. We just don't allow it. But in litigation, many times also, the fault really doesn't lie squarely at the clinician's feet. But we have a tendency to take on a lot of guilt around it, that something happened on our watch, that maybe we could have been able to do something if we'd only paid more attention or had our finger on the pulse more about what was happening in the hospital. Or, there are a lot of systemic drivers of error now. But usually the physician becomes the face of it. And that's tough for a lot of people.
Yeah. And you talked about some systemic issues. So what do you think in the healthcare industry is that makes us prone to litigation too? Because I do understand. I heard a soundbite of one of the podcasts that you did where you talked about, there's so much gray area in medicine and for us too. And maybe when I was struggling at some point, that really helped me. So thank you. But yeah, there's so much gray area in medicine that, it's bound to happen, like you said. So what do you think are issues in the system that could contribute to it?
Well, really sort of practically speaking, right now, a lot of us are operating in, hospital systems where we are understaffed. We've been forced to use electronic medical records that we know studies have shown are actually error-inducing. They create more problems than they fix.
Mm-hmm.
Medication errors, wrong patient errors. These errors are so much easier to create now than they used to be. And I know EMRs have their place, but we all know that they can really create a lot of problems for people. Between the staffing, the EMR, the fact that physicians are now usually so overscheduled and trying to spin so many plates in the air at once just to keep their practices solvent, it's bound to happen. Something is bound to fall through the cracks. It is an impossible ask for it not to, I think. I think if operated in places where we could really, take our time and spend tons of time with the patient and spend time mulling over, like, oh, geez, what else, could be going on? And let me make sure that all of these results are exactly as they should be. And let's, just in case the lab didn't flag the result that ought to have been flagged, let me take the time to go through every single line item of the CBC. We don't have that. So we rely on these systems, and the systems are imperfect.
Yeah.
But we become the face of it when, I'm working with a client right now who is just beside herself because she missed a lab had returned and it wasn't flagged as abnormal. And so it led to an adverse event happening with a patient for which she feels entirely responsible. And she is actually the target defendant in a lawsuit about it. But I ask, like, when you are primed to trust a system to work in a certain way, that you can look at the labs that are flagged in a certain way, like, can you really take all that responsibility on yourself? But we do tend to. And it's a tough situation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, I think it's unfortunate to say the least that happened. And yeah, we do feel a lot of shame around it. And you talked about, what do you think, what is the effect of litigation for healthcare professionals? And I know you've talked about your own experiences in the past, but really, I think it's not understandable how bad it is, or maybe it's not out in the open. Then when you get sued, it almost feels like, oh my God, what happened to me? So do you mind elaborating on that, what it feels like?
Well, it's going to feel different for every individual person going through it, but I have yet to meet anybody for whom it did not make some kind of impact.
Yeah.
Especially when it's a serious case with serious allegations and a lot on the line. And whether or not that person feels like they're responsible for what happened, there's still this really complex cascade of emotions that really starts from the time of the adverse event itself, if you are aware of what happened, because sometimes you're not, or being named in the lawsuit. It starts with that accusation. And we have not had any modeling around how to think about that, how to manage our emotions around that. And we tend to judge ourselves when we don't handle stress well, because we are historically so good at handling stress. Like, that's what we do as doctors. But all of a sudden, here is this complex, weird, hot, steaming bowl of shame and fear and anxiety and accusation and shame. It's all in there. And we don't know what to do with it. We don't know what to do with it. It stops us in our tracks. It makes our hearts just completely sink. And whether or not someone, copes with this quote unquote well, is really hard to predict. But certainly in a person who was already feeling burned out, or who already was feeling depressed or anxious, or who is a true perfectionist, like really talks to themselves in a way that, with cruelty to motivate themselves. We see this a lot in medicine. That's how a lot of us got ourselves to do the things that we were supposed to do. Nothing makes that kind of stuff rear its ugly head like litigation. Or if you were someone that struggled with imposter syndrome, here you are thinking like, I don't know why they let me do this job, but somehow they do. And here I am. And someday they're going to figure it out. Oh, here comes the lawsuit. Oh, I guess they figured it out. And now I have to live with the consequences of this. And so it gets, anywhere from a place of distraction and sleeplessness and just an anxiety to really dangerous circumstances where people are, perhaps using substances to help cope or, buffer away some of these negative emotions, contemplating suicide, career abandonment, divorce, relationship destruction, reckless behavior. All of those are much more common than we realize.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you said it so accurately about that thing about the imposter syndrome. It feels like you just described like an accurate situation that probably happens to a lot of people and they can name it, that this is what's happening to me. One thing that I came across, one of the feelings was also anger towards whoever has sued you or the families or the patients that you take care of. Is that a common feeling too?
Very much.
Almost like a distress that they don't realize how distressed I am, although I'm supposed to be their helper,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Anger. Yes. And anger comes up in a lot of ways. Anger comes up certainly for the physician who feels like this is unjust or, for whatever reason, they didn't make a mistake or they did everything they could, or this was completely out of their control. Or even if something happened that they felt like they didn't have complete control over, they're angry that they are now forced to contend with this system. And the system is so opaque and difficult to understand. And no one, you don't know your role and you don't know what you're supposed to do. And nobody else seems to be taking it the way you do. And it doesn't work the way you want it to work, which is you want it to work fairly. You want it to work in a way where people understand your decision making and why you did the things that you did. And it doesn't work that way. And so the deeper you get into it, and you really start to really learn that when you're in it. And then it starts to feel awfully unjust. And then the anger really does start to mount up. And that can be as devastating a feeling as the grief and despair and anxiety and fear. It will eat you alive.
Yeah. There is so much silence around. Also, when you talk about these feelings about talking to someone about this, right? Like we feel a lot of shame. So we feel a lot of personal shame, but also I'm interested, like legally, should you be talking to a friend or a colleague? Because they usually, the first time it happens, they're going to say, don't tell anybody about it. Maybe your attorney tells you that. So what do you think? Yeah.
I think you should talk to people.
Okay.
So there is a difference between, and yes, usually you come into someone's office and they give you this blanket statement of, please don't talk about this with anybody but your attorney or the claims people, right?
Yeah.
People who are directly involved in your legal care.
Sure.
And that's it. And we're very good rule followers, so we don't. Oh, a lot of the times we don't. We're traumatized, but we keep that inside. And I know people that didn't tell their spouse for years, that really just didn't get any kind of support or help. I was one of them. I told my husband, he was a doctor, he kind of got it, but like, who else was I going to talk to? But everybody should learn that there is a magic sentence that has to be said at deposition. And of course it has to be true because you're under oath. And the magic sentence is that you have not discussed the details of your medical care or this case with anybody but your legal team. And the word details matters because the complaint, like the generalities of this case, that's public record. Like the complaint in this lawsuit is public. So, okay, you can talk about that. You can talk about the generalities about how you're feeling, how this is making you feel. The only downside of talking to other people about it is that, yeah, they could then get deposed. You're going to have to disclose that at deposition. And then if the plaintiff's attorney felt like it, they would have to depose that person. And if that person couldn't handle themselves in a deposition, then okay, maybe your case would suffer. That is a real and true possibility. But we navigate these conversations every day. As physicians, we know what constitutes a case detail because we understand HIPAA. Right? We know how to talk in hypotheticals and vaguely, as opposed to really talking about the details of any case. We know about privacy. We know how to walk a line. It's okay to walk that line. You just need to be able to say in truth when you show up that I've talked about the details of this case, the details of my medical care. At 10:08, I answered the page. At 11:05, I was at the bedside. Those are your case details. Okay, let's keep those pretty tight. Okay. But if it's like, you know what, I got nailed in this wrongful death suit and my deposition is in a few weeks and I'm super stressed, that's fair game. That's fair game. Talk to who you need to talk to.
You said something that the person can be deposed, so anybody who is not involved in the case can be deposed. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you get to deposition, one of the early things they're going to ask you is who you've talked to about this case.
Okay.
And, what you find in deposition is that your words and the precision of your words matters a great deal.
Yeah.
Okay. So what they want to know is there anybody that it would be smart for us to try to get more information out of? And if there's really nobody out there that you've told more than, just the generalities that this thing is happening, they're not going to waste their time torturing another person. It's a whole day, basically, deposition a lot of the time.
Yeah.
They're not going to call that person in. But if you do say like, well, I talked to this person and this person, and, they really feel like they need more information, they might. Mm-hmm. They might try to do that, and so, yeah, you should be careful. I mean, first of all, you're talking to trusted people who care about you.
Yeah.
And you just learn to be strategic in how you talk about these things and really keep it focused more on your feelings about the events than the events, right? They want to know who knows about the events. But your feelings about the events, all right, let's talk coaching for a second. Because I just did a training with a hospital a couple of weeks ago. So I go to hospital systems and I will train peer support programs about how to support specifically providers who are in litigation, like litigation-focused peer support.
Sure.
So we had to start drilling down the differences between thoughts and facts. So as coaches, we spend a lot of time pointing out to people that your thoughts aren't facts, right? Okay. So if someone is telling someone your thoughts about like what it means to be involved in this, my feelings about those things aren't facts. Those aren't medical facts. Those aren't case facts. Those aren't facts, right? So you haven't told the facts of this case to the other person. Yeah. Right? You are, talking about your feelings about being in the case. That's very different. Those aren't facts.
Okay. That makes sense. No, that makes sense.
I mean, sure. Could someone make a point of trying to like find out, did Dr. Pensa feel bad about what happened? Did she feel guilty? Did she feel like, but what they really want to get at, did she feel like this was her fault? And the problem is everybody who starts off in litigation starts off feeling this must be my fault.
Yeah.
There has to be some way in which this is my fault. And a lot of the times it's not. So people show up with these, but those are the kind of standard emotions that come along with this. So when talking to peer supporters, if they were ever to get deposed, I mean, really the truth of it is like Dr. Pensa showed up with emotions that are pretty typical for everybody that comes through this process. Yeah. That is the answer to that.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, so that I didn't think about that. If you had a peer supporter, they could be deposed too with that. Oh.
Technically, yeah. I mean, does it happen? I mean, I don't personally know of any. Every time I go to one of these things, I ask the risk people there because it's usually a combination of risk and lawyers and clinicians who are there. And I always ask the question, like, have you ever heard of a peer supporter getting deposed?
Right.
And the answer's always been no. But a lawyer will never tell you never. So,
yeah.
and
Yes.
they'll never tell you that you're 100% safe. Trust me on this.
I agree. Okay, so talking about that was really helpful. I feel like I know a little bit about this topic, but there's so much that I didn't know that you just talked about. So thank you. Talking about what is the professional or financial impact of it as a physician or a nurse or anyone who has been sued, and what's the worst that could happen? Because that's where mind would go when this happens. Yeah.
Okay. If you are a person who has not been sued an inordinate number of times, and by the way, that number really changes for a specialist. It is not uncommon for an OBGYN to start racking up double digits by the end of a long career. Like that does happen. And whenever you're whenever you're applying for privileges or a new job, people find the part where they're asked to describe the lawsuit or to talk about it, they find that kind of triggering, but you shouldn't. This is your opportunity to show, like, I'm a good and thoughtful doctor who just happened to wind up in this thing. Like, if you are able to show that and your lawyer can actually help you come up with language around that, most people who are on the hiring committees, like, they get it. They're usually doctors too. And so, like, a couple of dings in a career where it's expected to get a couple of dings like that, don't let that scare you. I actually was just coaching someone not long ago who had wanted to put her hat in the ring for department chair. And then she got named in a lawsuit and she said, well, now, of course, I can't apply to be department chair. And I was like, why not? She said, well, because now I'm getting sued. I'm like, okay, like these things aren't mutually exclusive. And by the way, she is now department chair. So
good.
Yeah, I know. So, but people get these thoughts like, oh, my career is over. Like, oh, I'm going to lose my license. Am I saying those things never happen? No, because sometimes cases are, sometimes there are cases and then there are like catastrophes. And sometimes when you have made a catastrophic error, even though as a human being, you deserve forgiveness. You deserve to be able to contend with that, the grief around that. It does not make you a bad person. You are just working in a really tough arena. But sometimes in the truly catastrophic events with catastrophic errors, sometimes there are professional consequences. That does happen. Or when that happens too many times, and maybe it is more of a signal that you do need to look at your skill set and really, because we know that bad things do happen, right? So that has to be attended to. But for the most part, for most of us, one or two lawsuits is really not going to be any kind of a game changer for our careers. Now, the other part of your question was, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, we're talking about the catastrophe, right? So there are so many lawsuits that are either settled or go away. I started off by saying that half of them turn into no pay cases or where you're dropped. It doesn't happen instantly. It's going to be years before you get any kind of an outcome, right? But the grand majority of the time, you are going to be just fine, right? Okay, there's a settlement and you're in the data bank. I just went through this whole lengthy thing of like, okay, everybody's in the data bank, right? There's a lot of people in the data bank. Don't feel bad about that. We can have a whole other conversation about the shame around that, but it's not necessary. Now, if you go to trial, it's because people believe in your care. Unlike other things, like if you're on trial as a criminal, even though you're supposed to be presumed innocent, a lot of times you're there because they've amassed enough evidence that they feel like they have a really strong case against you. When you're going to trial as a medical defendant, it is because the insurance company, your experts, everybody has looked at this care and felt like, nope, what we did here is defensible. It met or exceeded the standard of care, and we can talk more about what standard of care is. But this person acted reasonably, and perhaps something happened that we didn't want to happen, but their care was reasonable in this case, and we're going to fight that.
Yeah.
The physician wins there the grand majority of the time, but once in a while they lose. And that's where everybody sort of puts the fear around that. because if there is a large verdict, will I be in the newspaper? You might. That's true. Is there a chance that I will be held responsible for these assets? There is a small chance, a very small chance. It is extraordinarily rare. It is literally like a lightning strike. And the reason for that is, one, sometimes there are strategies that keep the defendant from being personally responsible for any of that.
Right.
And so the insurance company is going to try really hard for that not to happen. And there are post-verdict negotiations that happen. And a lot of times that number is going to come way, way down, or it's going to get appealed. So it's in one of the podcasts, I talked to an attorney named Dusty Otwell about these nuclear verdicts or these runaway verdicts. And he said something that stayed with me, which was that verdict, that aberration verdict, that's halftime.
Yeah.
And so don't despair. It is a truly rare event. And when that happens, even if it does land in Europe, there's still other things that you can do beyond that. So it's a long road, but it doesn't have to be as devastating as we make it out to be in our brains when we're starting out. The likelihood of that is so low. There are much higher risks of you getting in a car accident on your way to work, or like, what if there are a lot of other things that you should fear more than that?
Yeah.
But our minds just go to the worst possible scenario because we don't understand anything. And when you don't understand catastrophe, you catastrophize. That's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
Your mind's going to go there because you don't understand the process. That's why we need to start learning about the process more.
Yeah. I do want to circle back to something that you said, and I know that you said it's going to be a separate topic, but about settlement. I'm curious if somebody decided to settle or not settle. It's a tough question, but is settling still okay? Or how do you make that decision? And I know you've talked in several podcasts about what you did for yourself, and I've heard that story. But what would you have as general advice?
My general advice about it is to take shame out of the equation.
Okay.
It's hard to do because what we if you understand this business, you know that a settlement does not equal responsibility. And a lot of times it's part of the settlement. The physician is not accepting responsibility. It's just that we've come to this number that everybody agrees on, and it gives us some degree of clarity and certainty about the outcome of this, and everybody can now go their separate ways.
Sure.
We tend to not feel like that. We tend to feel like, this means that we did something bad. And okay, is there a little bit of that maybe in the public discourse? Would they perhaps think that if they knew? And sometimes they do know, because if it's a big number, it might be in the paper, or it might be public in some way.
Sure.
Those are all feelings, right? Do these settlements touch us financially? No. Do they, as we mentioned before, do they really change our hireability or our employability? No. Are they sometimes just the best choice in a whole bunch of bad options? Yeah. They are. Do you have the choice all the time? No. Increasingly, more and more often, you do not have say over whether this thing gets settled or not. And that's tough because other people don't know that you don't have say over it. And so you might have wanted to fight. And then on the other hand, there are people who are literally begging for a settlement. I was one of those people. I was like, please don't make me go to trial. I don't want to do this. Find a way, settle this case. And they didn't want to settle the case. They really felt like, I think, your care was good. We're gonna fight this. But I know people who they will move heaven and earth to get the insurance company to work out some kind of settlement because they cannot deal with the uncertainty.
Yes.
Of hanging on to this for more and more years and then perhaps going to trial. They want someone to write a check and forget about it. So the emotions around it are very, very complex. But you have to remember that settlements are, like everything else we do in life, we make the meaning out of them. We decide, what does this mean? for us, for our lives, for the value of our career. Like, how much are we going to worry about what other people may or may not think about that number, what other people may or may not understand about that number, if it doesn't affect our hireability or our net worth or our value as a human or as a doctor. We talk a lot about that. Like, what are we making this mean? And is it necessary?
Yeah. I love what you said about it. It's whatever we make out of it, the meaning, and it's not self-determined that settlement is good or bad. I don't think anyone could have put it in a better way. I want to talk about, so we talked about our distrust in the patients and just talking about practicing defensive medicine. It's something that I've seen after litigation. Maybe I experienced it myself that, there is some sort of mistrust with the patients as well. And you do want to do everything, like recheck everything, do everything again and again. Is that common? How can we get past that too?
That is very common. I mean, you see all sorts of behavior changes in the wake of this. And it could be spending hours and hours afterwards documenting, trying to, everyone's trying to really fight to avoid this happening again. They're so afraid of this in the process and the toll that it exerted on them, that they would do just about anything to avoid being in it again, right? Because they haven't been able to process it or get to this place of equanimity and acceptance about it. And so, yes, it does really drive, I mentioned career abandonment. It makes a lot of people say, like, this isn't worth it. Like, I've been kind of operating with this empty cup for so long, and like, now you just blew the bottom out of it. Like, how am I gonna do anything? I don't want to do this anymore. So lots and lots of changes like that. There is a path back from that, but it all has to do with getting to a place where you are not as afraid of this process as you might otherwise have been if you did not understand and sort of make peace with the beast. Like many, many other very challenging things in life that we don't want to happen to us, right? Yeah. And I use the framework of grief when I try to give people a way to sort of understand it. Is that grief we understand grief, like we all get it, even though we don't want it to happen to us. Yeah. But we've seen that it happens to other people. We know it happens to everybody eventually. Yeah. You've seen it in books and in TV shows and in movies. And so that there's a possibility for moving through it somehow. And then maybe even on the other side being better, wiser, somehow integrating into that is a possibility, not for everybody, but for some people they do it, right? Yeah. This, you have no framework for understanding. And there is no belief that this was something that was sort of a natural event, a natural, very difficult event. With grief, at least, there's some way to deal with this and to integrate it into who I am. And so it doesn't make you avoid the loving relationship that winds up handing you the grief. Yeah. Right? You enter another relationship at some point. You buy the dog knowing that the dog is going to die. In the next, I mentioned that because I have a new dog, but my dog died a couple of years ago. And the grief was like so insane. And I, of course, at the time was like, I will never, ever do this again. Now I have a 1-year-old puppy, but it doesn't keep us out of the relationship because we understand how that somehow we'll make peace with it. This feels different because we don't know how to make peace with it. And so it makes us want to run away from any opportunity to engage in the relationship with medicine. Yeah. And it keeps us from experiencing the joy of medicine because the fear overrides all of it. And so what we need to do and what we do in coaching is really kind of tease all that stuff out and give people a framework for understanding what's happening to them and the skills to perform well in it so that they're not afraid. And understanding really like, what does this outcome actually mean about me and about my career and my worth and value as a doctor, and understanding that we are much more than any one case that happened to us in our careers. But it does take a little bit of, lens changing to get there. Yeah,
that was really thought-provoking, and very important as well. Is it all facts that determine the outcome of a lawsuit, or there are other dynamics that play into it? Like, is it just the facts of the case, or there's other things?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because
Yeah.
the facts are beside the point.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is when I usually lead with this sentiment. And people don't like it, but I'll start off with people by saying, if you come into this expecting fairness, you are going to be disappointed.
Okay.
There is so much that is, we want it to work like medicine. We want it to be like, here's the lab data points. Here's the findings on the physical exam. Therefore, here is our differential.
Yeah.
Do a little more testing and we arrive at a diagnosis. It's not like that at all.
Okay.
Largely because nobody adjudicating it understands medicine.
Mm-hmm.
The judge doesn't understand medicine. The jury doesn't understand medicine. And the medical experts that are supposed to be explaining the medicine to the judge and the jury are both paid by their sides and taught in general to slant their testimony towards whomever is paying them. Now, are there good experts that don't do that? Yes, that is true. But I spend 2 hours in this podcast talking about expert witnesses and testifiers and my particular ire for people that do that.
Yeah.
And so you start to, when I talked about the anger, when you get ankle and then knee and then waist deep in this and you realize whoa, the facts of this, they might not really mean as much as we want them to mean. And so it is really a lot more about optics, strategy, story, narrative, performance of the defendants, how they give testimony, a good deposition, strategy. And, a good lawyer helps, obviously.
Yeah. And I know, and I would refer to anybody who's listening, that Dr. Pensa's podcast, I think it talks a lot about that strategy. So yeah, if somebody's going through a lawsuit, definitely should listen to that because it's really, really helpful. How can we prevent risk of litigation? And do you think that it is doing anything positive in our healthcare system, or mostly just creating this culture of fear?
Okay. They're both big questions. So, what can we do to avoid lawsuits? I think that's an important question. I think risk management is important.
Yeah.
We obviously want to reduce risk. We obviously want to reduce risk of adverse events. So anything that reduces the risk of an adverse event will also reduce the risk of litigation. However, it is impossible to get that risk to zero. So just when we mentioned working in the gray, this is an arena. I get annoyed when people say it's like flying planes. It's not, right? We don't have gauges that make sense and, a light that goes up on the patient when something, some vitamin ran out. We don't get these indicators.
Yeah.
And the plane isn't telling you a story that completely doesn't work with whatever disease they have.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So there is always going to be room for error, which we want to reduce all the time. Quality is super important. Safety, super important. Fixing whatever system stuff that makes it easier to make mistakes, super important. All of it's important. But I think we also have to understand that this concept of errorless medicine is a total myth. There is no perfection. There is no errorless state. There isn't. We can try to approach that as close as we can, but we're not. It's what's the math word for that? Asymptotic. There's you're not going to get there.
Yeah.
But yes, we should try to reduce as much as possible. And to me, most of it is about communication and just practicing good medicine. But your 4 hours spent documenting after your shift, that doesn't really help anybody.
Yeah.
The obsessive compulsive disorder that you get about the checking and the rechecking of things that you already know are okay, that's not helping anybody. But your basic sound risk management principles, communicating, listening, and unfortunately taking more time than we're allotted with people. And that's easier for some people to say than other people to say, because you may not be the master of your time.
Yeah.
But for me in the emergency department, I would say, like metrics aren't my mama. Like if I need to take more time to figure something out, I gotta take more time, right? Urgent care, similar situation.
Yeah.
It's just, some things you can speed through, some things you can't.
Yeah.
And okay, is there any benefit to this? Well, we do need a system. Like there has to be a system because we do know that patients do get harmed. We do know that we do make mistakes. And should there be some system by which the patient gets some degree of, money can't heal the things that happen, but some kind of help, some kind of restitution? Yeah, there needs to be a system like that. The problem is this system, this system where I just pointed out that the results have nothing to do with reality half the time. Like the people in it don't understand medicine. The judges adjudicating it don't understand medicine.
Yeah.
It's so just, so ugly. Like it just drags people through the mud. It lasts for years and years and years. And so it's years before the plaintiffs get any of the money, of which, of course, the plaintiff's attorneys are going to take 40% plus expenses. It doesn't let the clinician and the patient, now plaintiff, it doesn't let them talk to each other. It doesn't allow for any sort of healing interactions. It doesn't allow the plaintiffs to understand that the doctors do, in fact, really, truly do care about them.
Yeah.
It isolates everybody, and it just makes everybody adversaries. And I don't think it has to be that way. And so there's a documentary that just came out called The World of Hurt.
Yeah.
How medical malpractice fails everyone. You can stream it for free on YouTube or on PBS, and it's only 27 minutes, but it highlights other ways, perhaps, of doing this. It in this country, we've got things like the Michigan model, these communication and resolution programs. There are probably a million other ways of doing this that are better than what we do right now, for all parties concerned, not just us.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for saying that. I don't think I've heard it that way, and I may have felt it, that it doesn't allow us to communicate with the family or the whoever it happened to, and we're just standing against each other. And also, I've also wondered several times, do this lawyer or the family know that, yes, the doctor really cared, and they're suffering and they don't?
Doesn't it matter? I think it matters. I mean, I really think that, not that you'll get dropped, or not that there won't be a payment, or I just think on like a real human level, if you thinking as a patient, if you entrust your life to someone, don't you want to know that they care about you, that something bad happened to you? Don't you want to know that that kept them up at night, or maybe that made them cry, or that they grieve for your loss also? Don't you think that would mean something? I think it does. I think it would.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just, I wondered, are they villainized? The doctors are villainized in the eyes of the plaintiff or the patient now?
Very much. Very much. Because the plaintiff's attorney, they're going to ask an expert. Some expert out there is going to be like, yep, oh, terrible, terrible care. This poor, certainly would have been done better somewhere else. And then the plaintiff's attorney is going to take that back to the plaintiff. And then every single fear that they had about the care that they got or their loved one got is going to be amplified. The plaintiff's attorney is going to say, we're going to get justice for you. We're going to fight so hard to get the justice that you need. These people don't care about you. They're villains. They're, and it's, it's unfair. It sets up this arena where that's completely driven by hate, and it really does not allow for closure or healing, and it's not good.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Thank you.
Is there any legal system in place to, and I know something about the tort reform or something happening in the background that can help protect healthcare providers in the future?
Well, I mean, there is a big difference in states that have tort reform versus not, especially in these sort of nuclear verdicts and the things that we're the most afraid about. And in those states, I mean, the only thing to do, and we hear this in everything that's really killing us about medicine right now, is you've got to get involved in your state legislature. And that's not my particular forte. That's not my gift. But if you're listening to this and it's yours, please do. Like, we need people lobbying for us. We need people to really understand, because certainly the plaintiffs' bar is quite strong in most states. They like run our state legislature. But, getting really understanding what is happening in my state and how do I get involved to advocate. I think pushing our professional societies, they kind of put it down for a while, and because there's so many battles to fight right now about, insurance companies and prior auths and all that stuff.
Sure.
I don't know that it's been getting the kind of attention that I still feel like it deserves. But I think what we can do ourselves, and what we really need to start paying attention to, we need to police our own. We need to police our own expert witnesses, because expert witnesses drive the system.
Okay.
You can't have a case go forward without an expert witness to say that there was indeed malpractice. So even in cases where clearly there was none, there is someone out there that they're going to find who has an MD that says that there was malpractice, because they get paid $600, $700 an hour to say so. We need to do a better job of finding those people and making them stop doing that. And so it becomes really like, what can professional societies do? What can, at some institutions, expert witnesses have to report their activities. They have to declare that they do expert witness work, and that may open them up to having their cases reviewed. There has to be some way by which we can start to, this is our house. Like, this is our house, and these people are destroying the inside of our house. So this is where we need to start thinking about how we can exert our influence.
In their mind, do they think they're like huge patient advocates and they're doing amazing by the patient?
I'm pretty sure they know. If they actually know medicine, I'm pretty sure they know. There is a voice inside of them saying, like, perhaps this is not entirely the highest integrity activity I could be doing.
Yeah.
But, the money does sway people. Money does sway people. And so, I think professional societies all really need to think about having some rules around expert witnesses as, around expert witness work as, some sort of a prerequisite for being in that society. I think that people have to be held to a certain code of ethics and be willing to have their testimony reviewed if they want to do this work. And they have to disclose that work, because the other thing, what is more secret than litigation is who does expert work. Like, you probably have no idea if your partners are doing expert work, because they're not going to tell you.
Yeah.
There are people who really they're really out there in front, who are very ethical about it. They want everyone to know that they do the work because they really care about being fair and balanced. And then there are the people who, are operating under the radar. They don't know. It feels dirty, and it fuels everything. And so we need to figure out how to do something about that.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. If anyone's listening, we need to work on that. You've talked about it in several little pockets, but just going towards our last question, what can healthcare professionals do to cope with this when something like this happens? And also, piggybacking another question, what can institutions do to support them better? Because the facts will remain the same, I think, for a while until the system changes.
They will. I think for the defendant, what you can really do is look at this as an opportunity to educate yourself. The podcast I made that because that was the thing I wish I had when I started. But finding resources, seeking out help, knowing that you can talk about it, being smart in the talking about it, but knowing that you can, and just knowing that you can get what you need, and that this, your relationship to this stressor can change. It feels terrible at first, but if you gain knowledge and skills and understanding of it, you can get to a place where you see this is more of an occupational challenge, rather than this terrible albatross that's going to be around your neck for ever and ever. It again, we make a lot of meaning that doesn't need to be there. Institutions, I think, have an obligation to support their people. I think this is a workplace safety issue. When we start talking about suicide, I think that institutions have an obligation to attend to the well-being of their employees or the people that do the work within those walls. They have an obligation. And so, yeah, it behooves institutions to set up systems of support, systems of education. We have to do a lot better at educating people about this. There's, I gotta say, like, probably 70-80% of what I do with any given client is the same. It's addressing knowledge deficits, doing some mindset work, kind of doing a software update about how we think about these things. We could be doing a lot better in terms of transferring these things to young physicians or physicians who haven't been sued yet. Because so much of our anxiety is anticipatory, because we just don't understand anything. And so we let fear completely drive that bus. So yeah, I'm developing programs now. I'm hoping to, get them out to more institutions. I have a CME course in the making that I'm hoping will be helpful to people, where we really talk about, how do you weather this well? What does it mean to be a good defendant? Everybody says they don't want to be a good defendant, but I think everybody should be a good defendant.
Yeah. Do you do private coaching at this point?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I will. I have a wait list because I still work clinically a couple of days a week.
Yeah.
I do. I don't want to deter anyone from reaching out, but I do, and I'm working on some more group programs. I do a lot of witness preparation work for insurance companies and for defense attorneys. I'm doing some really, I think, what's going to be the basis of the CME course. I have a sort of mixed video and live session combination thing that is working quite well. The survey data is really good. So I'm excited. I think that I think that there are places that we can go where we can get some education out.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. And again, thank you for doing this great work, and thank you for doing this podcast. And I would say I will put the link for
doing this podcast.
Yes. I'll put the link for the documentary at the end, because I haven't watched it, so I should watch it too. And your podcast.
I would love for you to. I'd be really excited to hear what you thought.
We do end this podcast, and I'll read a 1-minute poem if you'll stay with me for that, and then we'll go towards the end. So it's called Don't Quit by John Greenleaf Whittier. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile, but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is strange with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometime learns, and many a failure comes about, when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up, though the pace seems slow. You may succeed with another blow. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt. And you can never tell just how close you are. It may be near when it seems so far. So stick to the fight when your heart is hit. It's when things seems worse that you must not quit. For all the saddest words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been. Thank you so much, Dr. Pensa, for doing
that. Was beautiful. I appreciate it.